Hello everyone, and welcome to another video. So this is the second half of the Gaslands project that I've been working on. Specifically, I'm focusing on getting, just for the purposes of doing it in front of the camera, painting one Gaslands car. So just to start with, what I'm doing there is I'm working on some masking. What I've already done off camera is I've went ahead and primed the mesh that I inserted into the car body in black and then dry brushed it just to give it a metallic look, and now I'm masking it off in preparation for the broader paint job. Okay, so onto our first color. Now this is going to take many layers. I'm just going to apply a green from my game color range, and I'm going to keep doing this until there's generally an even base coat all over the car body. This is by far the most time consuming stage of this video, as like an amateur, well, since I am an amateur, I failed to completely shake up that paint pot, so it wasn't properly pigmented. Anyway, as you can see, this is going to take a while, so let's put it on time warp, shall we? Alright, now we're done with our base coat. Next stage is to paint the undercarriage of the vehicle. I'm doing this obviously in like stages of how difficult areas are to access, and the undercarriage is going to be a harder part to access once we've got more colour down. And as you can see, I'm not being particularly neat at this stage. I just want to get some colour into the recesses. So yeah, as you can see, I've got my favorite metallics. In this case it's burnt iron, so I want a fairly dark and dirty metallic for the undercarriage, and pretty much we're just gonna let it get into the recesses. Now this works particularly well with the more watery metallic air paints. I'm just going to try and run it deep into the cracks. I'm not going to worry too much about getting on the body, because I'll do a pass to clean up the body once I am satisfied with the layer of metallics on the undercarriage. We will also paint the hubcaps, side skirts, and the front and rear bumpers the same colour. So now that we're done with the metallics, we'll go back and clean up our overspill. So I'm just going to apply a couple of layers of green over any overspill, and that will clean up the hull quite nicely. Okay, so that's the hull done and the metallic components. Now we'll do the tyres. For this colour I'm going to use Vallejo model colour black, my mattest of blacks. And we'll proceed with painting the tyre. So you'll notice I'm using a spare finger just to hold the tyre in place, while I'm being very careful to run the colour onto the tyre while avoiding the hubcap and the body of the car itself. And once the sidewalls are done, we'll just go around the tyre, just spinning it as we go, and actually paint the surface of it. And then just repeat for each tyre, and then you're done. Okay, now we'll start painting some details. So, as I mentioned in the last video, the roof rack is covered with a plethora of equipment and model detail, so we'll apply a selection of colours to them just in preparation for the initial dry brush and wash, in that order, weirdly enough. So my colour selection is nothing fancy. I'm just going to pick some random utility type colors from the box and just paint layers on these components until I am satisfied that there's a flat, even coat. And we're done with the roof rack. Well, mostly. I'm just applying metallics to the guns now, and I also applied some metallics to some of the things within the roof rack. Notably, there's a chainsaw blade in there, so I thought that deserved a coat of metallic. So, like with the hull, it's nothing fancy, except this time we're being particularly careful to avoid overspill. And you just saw me get some water ready, because we're getting onto the stage where for transfers soon. Okay, the first stage of the transfers is to put down a gloss on the site where the transfers will go, so I'm accomplishing this using my quite useful gloss floor polish, and what I'm going to do is just give it a thin coat over the two sides. So I don't know what past me is waffling on about there, but he should in a minute apply the gloss. There we go, to the model. Excellent, so we'll let that dry and come back to it when we are ready to apply our transfers. You'll also notice that I haven't done the gun sticking out of the windshield yet. This is because I'd rather wait until I've unmasked it fully so I can basically do a paint job where I don't have to reblend it once the masking material is off. Anyway, another thing I'm going to do while waiting for that to dry is I'll repaint in the front and rear lights. So for the headlights, I'm just going to use a white grey colour, and just dab it in repeatedly until I'm satisfied with the layer of color I've built up. And then I'll put in some indicators with some orange and some brake lights with some red at the back. Okay, so you'll see I've got the two transfers down there and soaking, and they have been for some time. But for now, what we need to do is get some of our microset and microsol on the model. So, as you can see, first of all, we'll apply our microset. Just give the entire glossed area a coat of this material, this liquid, and then we'll apply the transfer. These transfers are particularly stubborn, so they'll take a minute to dislodge from their paper. It also doesn't matter too much if you do damage the transfers at this stage. It'll just make them look like nicks and tears in the paint, which is an effect we're definitely going to go for in the latter stages of this paint job. Now that we're done with applying the transfers, we'll get our second stage liquid, the microsol, and we'll put a thin layer over each of the transfers. Now, if you've seen my video on how to use this stuff before, the idea of this one is this melts the transfer slightly and makes it more readily adhere and bend to the contours of the thing you're applying it to. So yeah, it'll make it look more like something that's painted on rather than something that's stuck on. So we'll let that sit and be done with it soon. And now that the transfers are sufficiently dry, we'll get our gloss floor polish again and put another layer of the stuff over the transfer to seal the transfer down. This is essential to protect it from the upcoming stages of the paint job. So it looks like we're getting towards the final stages for the, well, at very least the acrylic layers of the paint job. We'll just do some cleaning up and neatening up in preparation for moving on to the absolute final stages. And this is where I made my first mistake. What I was meant to do is give the overall model a dry brush of dark sand to give it a dusty, beaten up look. Now, what I'm doing here is I'm applying a gloss varnish all over in preparation for the use of enamels. So I'll realize this later on, and then I'll go back and correct my mistakes. Let's skip forward to that. Okay, so the gloss is mostly dry. That's fine. What we're going to do is get our dark sand. I'm going to pop some on the paper palette, and then we're going to prepare a heavy dry brush, which is going to go over the entire model very indiscriminately. So, you've all seen videos and details on how to dry brush before, no doubt. So, let's put us on time warp, shall we? And skip through to the final stages. Now that we've fixed up our mistake and have added in our highlight layer, which we've done via a dry brush, we'll now do our actual layer of gloss varnish to protect the model in preparation for the enamel work, which will happen immediately after this. Now we are on to the weathering. So what I've got here is I've got some German camo black brown, I've got a bit of torn blister sponge, and I'm going to basically create a mini dry brush with it, and then I am going to start dabbing it down on the model to add in some detail. Now again, I should have done this before I'd applied the gloss varnish, but I forgot, so no matter. Now as you can see, I'm being very, very rough with it. I'm going to try and deliberately hit those transfers in order to deliberately break them up and look like they're chipped and dinged, as we want this car to give the impression that this car has been in use in the wasteland for some time and has, at very least, the bodywork has not been particularly well maintained or loved. So now that we've done our first layer of brown, which represents layers of chipping down to the primer of the car, we're going to do some metallics which represent an even deeper layer of chipping, and we're going to be a bit more sparing with this. So again, we will create our little mini dry brush with our piece of foam, and we'll start chipping the car. Okay, now here is where we get messy. So to start with, I'm going to get my first enamel layer, which is a Mig Dark Wash. Oh, of course, the first thing I need to do is remove the masking material. Now, this will take a while, so let's activate the time warp. Okay, so as you can see, that took way more effort than I expected, so now we're ready to move on with the actual paint job. You'll also notice that at some point I applied a metallic colour to the forward gun, and I probably forgot to do that on camera. But no big deal. Let's move on. So with this layer, I'm just going to be extremely messy and just make sure I get it applied evenly and all over the model. This may look like you're ruining the paint job at first, but don't be alarmed. The one advantage of enamels is that you can take it off the model if you feel you've put too much down, and if anything, that's part of the effect you'll achieve. It's sort of like a wash, you can take away and add as you see fit. That's what I've got the 2 bottles of, I believe it's odorless thinner behind me. That's the stuff we'll be using to clean this mess up once it's dried, at least to a slight degree. Okay, time to do our first round of cleanup. So while it's still wet, I'm just going to get a bit of rag and I'm going to start wiping the majority of the wash away. Now, this material is such that it should more or less come off the model, but still remain in the deepest crevices, which is pretty much what we're aiming for. It will also generally tint the model pretty dark brown and dirty, which is exactly what we're after for this sort of effect. Also be careful with this stage because the solvent part of the enamel can actually attack the underlying paint job if you're not careful, so be very gentle with the pressure you apply to this stage of it. Alright, so for this stage we'll start with another couple of layers of weathering. So I'm just going to get some of my AK Interactive rust effect and put it on my palette off to one side. Then I'll get a bit of blister sponge again, and as you can see, I'll start putting down some rusty patches all over the hull of this vehicle. Now, as you can see, the first pass looked only mediocre because the rust was a little too, concentrated. So now we'll get an other end of the blister sponge and we'll just start, while it's still wet, sponging it out and taking some away. This is to get a more diffuse layer of rust around these patches. Alright, this will be our final layer of enamels. Well, once I've get my hands out of the way. For this stage we'll put an additional layer of dirt and dust on the undercarriage areas of the car. Now this will reactivate a lot of our initial brown wash, so you can expect it to blend together a bit, which is, honestly, it's fine. blending often is pretty good for getting a variety of colour on the model, especially for weathering heavy jobs like this. Just be careful with it around the rust effects, as it will also disturb and disrupt the rust effects that we've already applied. So yeah, as you can see, I'm working it into the wheel wells and generally all of the areas on a car or a four-wheel drive where you can expect dust and dirt to accumulate as it goes through abuse in the, you know, in the course of being driven through desert and unforgiving terrain. And then we'll just wipe off some excess. Especially, this is fine because, you know, more exposed areas tend to be more like prone to weathering, so this is logically speaking where the areas which will be cleaned first, and so to speak. And as you can see, I accidentally destroyed some of my rust while doing that, so we'll just go back and reapply our work. This is like I said, this is the advantage of enamels for weathering. You can take it away and put it back again relatively easily. And I think we're just about done. So the stage I'm not going to record on camera is that for all of my cars, for this batch at least, I'm going to give them an airbrush layer of satin varnish to seal all our work in, and then they're more or less done. So we shall move on to the final review, I believe. Okay, so that is it. Yeah, these are very, very simple conversions that can be done relatively quickly and with fairly minimal care, to be honest. These aren't attempts to be particularly high quality conversions. There are certainly better examples on Gaslands, you know, social media, wherever you can find it. Of course, this is a gallery of all my cars to date, and yeah, it can be a lot of fun to do, especially if you have a lot of bits left over, and you know, the game itself is also pretty good. Very lightweight, and it's multiplayer, so you can actually have more than two people facing off against each other. Granted, you know, adding players does scale up time, but you can always scale down cars to compensate, like the number of cars. So yeah, as far as I'm concerned, Gaslands is a genuine breath of fresh air in the tabletop wargames community, and I highly recommend playing it. Anyway, thanks for watching if you've made it this far, and please, I've got a slideshow playing out of all of the cars I've done to date, so enjoy.